Hi students, a very good evening to one and all. I hope you have listened to my previous lecture on Derrida's structure, sign and play in the discourse of human sciences. Yesterday we have stopped with the concept of bricolage and bricolier, which Levi-Strauss in his work actually emphasized that a bricolier is one who works with his tools which are on hand, unlike depending upon the tools or methodologies, okay, methodologies which are very time tested, like error, trial and error method, etc. So the bricolier is actually the practical version of the engineer who is a theoretical idea. And he also stated that um, mythologicals, he is not going to study the structures of mythologies, but he is going to study the mythologicals. And he also stated that mythologicals is an intellectual activity, okay, and also a creative activity. And he says that it is a kind of mythopoetics that he, of course, brought in his book, The Raw and the Cooked. So, with referring to that, what else Derrida wants to say, and we will see in today's class. And then today I will try to conclude the rest of the part of this essay, which is mostly on Derrida quotes much from the works of Levi-Strauss, and then he takes to establish his own point of view, that is regarding the discourse in the human sciences, how structure, sign, and play are there in the human discourses, and what is the need to develop. So, what is the new path that human sciences should follow? That is what Derrida, of course, explains in the rest of the essay, the following pages of the essay. So, let us see, he quotes from the Raw and the Cooked. And as he stated earlier, that in his research, Levi-Strauss has actually um, commenced a kind of research which is decentering the center. So, in Levi-Strauss research, Derrida did not find an attachment to the center, or a what do you call, the central structure, or a unified presence, etc. Or that is where Derrida actually takes interest in the research work of Levi-Strauss. So he takes um, he takes from his book The Raw and the Cooked, and the two important points he mentions. In the text you have 1 and 2, but I am summing up. I am not going to read out from the text. I am summing up what he says in the first point. Dealing with many myths. Actually, The Raw and Cooked is a book about many myths. So, Levi-Strauss, while dealing with many myths, he takes one myth, that is Bororo myth, as a referential myth. But he says that he is not trying to make this myth as a central myth. It is only taken for the referential privilege. So, what he in this statement, what Levi-Strauss is indicating or conveying us is a kind of decentering only. Working on different myths, Levi-Strauss did not proceed to find out one particular center, say, which is the origin of all these myths, etc. So he did not wanted to do that. That is what is written. Say in this book as the Baroro myth, which he employs in the book as the reference myth, does not merit this name and this treatment. The name is specious and the use of myth improper. This myth deserves no more than any other its referential privilege. In fact, the Bororo myth, which I shall refer to from now on as the key myth, is, as I shall try to show simply, a transformation to a greater or lesser extent of other myths originating either in the same society or in neighboring or remote societies. This single inverted commas, it is taken from the text of the Ra and the Cooked, and Levi-Strauss actually stated this only. I am going to treat this as a key myth, but it is like any other myths only. And I could therefore have legitimately taken as my starting point any one representative myth of the group. So, as he has to begin for somewhere, he has taken this myth as a representative or a referential myth only, not because it is a central structure from where we can find out the origin of all myths, etc. This is not like that. And then, second point. He says, the second point, there is no unity or absolute source of myth. According to Levi-Strauss, in the discourse of mythology or mythologicals, as he stated, there is no unity or an absolute source of myth. Hence, it is futile to focus on the origins. So, usually, when a concept is taken for study or for research, we try to trace out the origins. But Levi-Strauss, of course, in his research, established that there is no use in tracing out for the origins, because for myths there is no unity or any absolute source. And according to Levi-Strauss, and Derrida agrees with him, that a myth is an eccentric structure. A myth is an eccentric structure. That means there is no center. And of course, Derrida's idea is to drive this point only, or his idea is to emphasize the importance of reading human sciences like eccentric structures. Okay, so a myth, Levi-Strauss says, that is an eccentric structure, and because it is eccentric, to go back to the epistemic structural discourse on myths is useless. So Levi-Strauss established this fact in his book, and of course Derrida wanted to emphasize this point, because he is also advocating the same thing in whatever concepts that he postulated as part of post-structuralism, that is deconstruction, difference, etc. Okay, so instead of pondering over the epistemic discourses, one should take up mythological discourse or mythomorphic discourses. And then further, Derrida quotes one of the long paragraphs of Levi-Strauss, and wherein he explains how the science of myths, or in his book, how he proceeded with his study. So the science of myths might therefore be termed anaclastic, if we take this old term in the broader etymological sense, which includes the study of both reflected race and broken race. But unlike philosophical reflection. See, it is anaclostic, that will study both reflected rays and broken rays also. But in philosophy, we have the concept of reflection, which aims to go back to its own source. The reflections we are dealing with here concern rays whose only source is hypothetical. So, proceeding to that, Levi-Strauss emphasizes that his manner of studying the myth is eccentric. He never wanted to establish any center. So what he made was a spontaneous movement of methodological thought. So his essay, this is also both too brief and too long, has had to conform to the requirements of the thought and to respect its rhythm. It follows that this book on myths itself is a kind of myth. So he, of course, is not announcing that he is writing a book which will become the center. Okay. So further, as the myths themselves are based on secondary codes, he says that myths are based on the secondary codes because the primary codes being those that provide the substance of language. So first is language, and myth of course comes from a particular language only, and so the myth becomes the secondary code, the primary code being the language. So so Levi-Strauss says that this book which I am writing is also a myth, and there is nothing wrong in considering this book as a myth, and the myth of mythology. So here what Derrida emphasizes is the absence of a center. Is here the absence of a subject and the absence of an author. That means the center, a subject, an author. Thus the myth and the musical work are like conductors of an orchestra whose audience becomes the silent performance. If it is now asked where the real center of the work is to be found, the answer is that this is impossible to determine. So there is no center. And music and mythology bring man face to face with potential objects of which only the shadows are actualized. Myths are anonymous. So that many in our cultures actually myths are anonymous. So after discussing this these views of Levi-Strauss on working the mythology, and he never tried to trace back the center. Moreover, he tried to project the eccentric structures of the mythologies or mythologicals, as he says. Derrida, of course, says that this method of Levi-Strauss, of course, is having some questions. Okay, but those questions, Derrida says that Levi-Strauss did not answer. So the questions are here. You can refer to the text. If the mythological is mythomorphic, are all discourses on myths equivalent? So this is the question after reading the Levi-Strauss book we will get. Shall we have to abandon any epistemological requirement which permits us to distinguish between several qualities of discourse on the myth? So these are the questions one will get after reading Levi-Strauss' work. For this, Derrida says, a classic but inevitable question. These questions are very inevitable. And of course, it cannot be answered. And Levi-Strauss also did not answer. Why? For as long as the problem of the relations between the philosophem or the theorem on the one hand and the mytheme or the mythopoem on the other has not been posed explicitly, which is no small a problem. So, for lack of explicitly posing this problem, we condemn ourselves to transforming the alleged transgression of philosophy into an unnoticed fault within the philosophical realm. Of course, Derrida says that empiricism is the genus of which these falls would always be the species. Actually, we always try to um, what you call get or arrive at an empirical evidence, which of course is not the characteristic of the language of human sciences. Okay, here actually these questions we will get only when we emphasize upon the empirical quality of the human sciences, which according to Derrida is not required. Okay, so empiricism need not be brought into the questions of the human sciences. Many examples could be given to demonstrate this risk, the concepts of sign, history, truth, and so forth. And here Derrida says that he means what he wants to state here is that the passage beyond philosophy does not consist in turning the page of philosophy, but in continuing to read philosophers in a certain way. So what we have to do is not to seek the empirical questions, but to continue the play. That is the reading philosophers in a certain way. Of course, this actually Derrida says that whatever risk I have identified, Levi-Strauss, of course, might have identified. And he says that empiricism is the matrix of all faults, managing a discourse which continues, as with Levi-Strauss in particular, to consider itself scientific. So, empiricism, of course, is the abstraction in the language of human sciences. And then further, Derrida proceeds to say that we cannot expect a kind of totalization effort. Okay, a kind of totalization effort in the discourse of the human sciences. Totalization, therefore, is sometimes defined as useless and sometimes as impossible. The discourse in the human sciences need not, of course, focus on totalization because it is useless and sometimes impossible. This actually, Levi-Strauss actually has referred to in his work on the raw and the cooked. And this is no doubt due to the fact that there are two ways of conceiving the limit of totalization. Okay. What is the limit of totalization? He says one is the richness of one subject can never be mastered. Actually, we say Master of Arts MA, but we know how much we master. So why a totalization is cannot be expected, okay, from the discourse of human sciences. Okay, he says it is because the richness of one subject can never be mastered. And further, language, a finite language excludes totalization. This is the question of language also. A finite language, of course, excludes the totalization. So, what happens if we emphasize on totalization? That is, in other words, an emphasis on the center. Okay, that means a structure. But Levi-Strauss, of course, has already stated that mythologies are eccentric. So there is no need for probing to find out a center. So totalization is an effort that controls the play of the sign, the signifier, and the signified. So the absence of totalization. What is the use of the absence of totalization? Levi-Strauss says in his book, and Derrida also says that the absence of totalization is in fact play. So the play of the sign, and a field of infinite substitutions. This play, allowing the sign to play, will create an infinite field of substitutions instead of locking up in one center or in one structure. In the infinite, something misses. That is the center which arrests and grounds the play of substitutions. So Derrida says that in the infinite, what is missing is finite. That means the center. The center always tries to arrest, means stop, and grounds the play of substitutions and locks the play of substitutions. So this is the problem of totalization. So a kind of total knowledge, etc., total study, etc., is not possible because Derrida says, and Levi-Strauss also stated the same thing. A subject cannot be mastered because it is infinite. The finiteness of the subject is never advocated. That means nothing will be closed at any point of time. Okay. And if we want to close it, the dynamism gets lost. So nothing should be closed. The meaning or the sign should be allowed to play so that the new significations, new substitutions, new interpretations will keep on coming. Okay. If totalization no longer has any meaning, it is not because the infiniteness of a field cannot be covered by a finite glance or finite discourse, but because the nature of the field, that is language, and a finite language excludes totalization. So he says, Derrida says that language by nature excludes totalizations. That is why he actually coined the word as difference. For him, the meaning is like the other end of the cloth, which is not visible. So it is always floating. You know, if you see in the nature itself that is there, you say that the horizon. Okay, the horizon is an imagine all a visible line where we think that the sky and earth are meeting. Okay, it seems, it appears, but when you go there, it will never end. So the similar manner, of course, meaning is also like that. So a totalization is not always at any time advocated because this is the nature of the language. And Derrida says that in the absence of the center only, the sign takes place, its substitutions, and it becomes a supplement. And in the absence of the center, the movement of significations adds something. That is, it goes on and on and on because there is no center to what you call arrest or ground or stop it. And the play, according to Derrida, says he is always is caught up in a tension. So what is that? The tension with the history and the tension with what you call presence. So the play, which is of course should be there in the human sciences, and he says the play is always in tension. You know, here, of course, the reference to play is always caught up in tension. Tension with history, first of all. Here Derrida says that I shall simply indicate what seems to me the formality of the problem by reducing history. Levi-Strauss has treated as it deserves a concept which has always been in complicity with teleological and eschatological metaphysics. In other words, paradoxically, in complicity with that philosophy of presence to which it was believed history could be opposed. So, the thematic historicity, of course, which arriving in philosophy has always been required by the determination of being as presence. Here, Derrida says that the play, of course, is always in tension with the history. If history is always the unity of becoming as the tradition of the truth or the development of science or knowledge, oriented towards the appropriation of truth in presence and self-presence, towards knowledge in consciousness of self. History has always been conceived as the movement of a resumption of history as a detour between two presences. So the play, of course, sometimes gets supplemented in history. Sometimes it may obstruct the play also. That is why it is stated that the play is always in tension with the history. Then he says that tension, there is a tension between play and presence. Play is the disruption of presence. So, when you encourage the play, of course, it is erasing the presence, that means a center, a structure. The presence of an element is always a signifying and substitutive reference inscribed in a system of differences and the movement of a chain. So the play is always signifying and substitutive reference. That is that takes place in the movement of a chain. Play is always a play of absence and presence. But if it is to be the thought radically, play must be conceived of before the alternative of presence and absence. So we are not bothered whether something is present or absent, but the play goes on. Being must be conceived as presence or absence on the basis of the possibility of play and not the other way round. So a being should be considered in tune with the play. And so like this, Derrida says that play is what is needed in the discourse of the human sciences. So while in the next following paragraphs also, Derrida focuses how the concept of presence, of course, is limiting the play, and he refers to the philosophical discourse also and philosophers also. And then he says that previously the play is not allowed because that was all the discourse of presence or a structure, etc. That is the history of Western metaphysics. And Derrida, in the following paragraphs of the essay, emphasizes that even from the moment of the rupture, okay, or say after structuralism, this is post-structuralism. So, in the post-structuralism, a new era of thinking towards the play of the sign should emerge. So, the sign, as understood by the structuralists, the sign, signifier, and signifier should not be limited to the fixing everything, every discourse to one particular structure or center, etc. But rather, the discourse should allow the play Okay, the play of the sign, signifier and signified. So this is what Derrida says actually uh, in his essay, and he concludes, taking the example of Levi Strauss. He says that there are two ways to interpret structure, sign, and play. One aims to decipher an absolute truth and avoid play. So, if the discourse on human sciences is aiming to arrive at one absolute truth, a single truth, like Bhaktin, you can connect it to the monologism also. That is that is of no use because it is limiting. Okay, and this when we come to the text of literature, you can very well understand, as we have already discussed, that if you try to analyze the text based on the authorial intention, if your sole aim when you are reading the text is to bring out the authorial intention, it is like the working towards the absolute truth, which Derrida is saying. But if you let loose the authorial intention and try to analyze the text in different angles or different aspects, what you are encouraging is the play. So Derrida, instead of the first, that is deciphering the absolute truth, is advocating for the second one, that is the play. So for Derrida, he thinks that throughout the entire human history, the search for the absolute truth, absolute presence, or the universal structure, etc., was there in the throughout the history of human sciences. And now he says that the second kind of thing where the play of the sign should be allowed is what is emerging. Say, with reference to the example of Levi Strauss and his work, Derrida could establish that there were attempts for the decentering of the center, or for the research or the idea or the discourse of the human sciences is uh, disconnecting itself from the absolute truth or the center, and then the play of the sign is being allowed, and this is what is needed according to Derrida in the discourse of the human sciences. That is why structure, sign, and play. So the sign is very important, but the sign should not be get locked in the structure according to Derrida. Rather, a free play of signs, SIGNS, should be allowed in the discourse of human sciences. Okay, this is what I have to share regarding this essay. Of course, this is a very tough essay, and in the text also, the style of writing is very, it is complex, or maybe because of the translated version that we are having, it presents somewhat confusing like thing. Don't worry, I will be giving you a summing up of the essay, which you can of course write in your examinations. And if you can, of course, here and there in some paragraphs, Derrida is very, clear in his thoughts and expressing his ideas, where though from those paragraphs, of course, you can take some more lines and add to the notes or whatever that I'll be giving to you. So this is what I have to present to you regarding this essay. I hope you will listen to the lectures and try to make out some sense out of what Derrida is trying to say regarding the structure, sign, and play in the human discourse. Okay, have a nice time.